In 2007, a package showed up in South Dakota. Inside it, a lock of hair, kept in a glass case at the Smithsonian for over 100 years. It belonged to Sitting Bull. In 2021, scientists pulled what little DNA was left out of that hair and used it to answer one question. Was the man who received that package really his great-grandson? But that wasn't the only thing the DNA turned up. For a long time, America told the Sioux story like it was already settled. Plains warriors, buffalo hunters. Quick note before we go further. Sioux is actually a historical exonym. Today, it's used as a common umbrella term for the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations. The people who defeated Custer and 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry at Little Bighorn in 1876, the last major defeat the U.S. Army suffered at the hands of native nations. That part's true. It's also, as you're about to see, just the final chapter of a much longer story, one written into the genome of the people who lived it. And for over a century, that story got told mostly by the side that won: broken treaties, forced removal, boarding schools built partly to erase this exact kind of memory. Somehow, the memory survived anyway. The 2021 study came from S.K. Willerslev, then at the University of Cambridge, working with the Lundbeck Foundation Geogenetics Center. His team spent over a decade figuring out how to pull usable DNA, inherited from both parents, not just the mother's side, out of Sitting Bull's degraded hair. They compared it to Ernie LaPointe, a 73-year-old man in South Dakota, who'd always been told he was Sitting Bull's closest living descendant. The match held up. Willerslev called it 100% certain. That made headlines everywhere. But it sat right on top of something stranger, a genetic marker that for over 2 decades nobody could fully explain. There's one tiny piece of DNA scientists lean on for this: mitochondrial DNA. You get it only from your mother, and it barely changes for thousands of generations, almost like a genetic surname that traces a straight maternal line back through deep time. Indigenous peoples of the Americas carry 5 major versions of it: A, B, C, D, and X. The first 4 fit the Beringian migration model more easily. Their ancestral forms are still sitting in Siberian populations near the old land bridge. You can trace the path step by step. Haplogroup X doesn't cooperate. Its branch in the Americas is called X2a. It turns up in a number of native nations, including some Sioux and Dakota communities, and much more often among Algonquian peoples around the Great Lakes. But nobody has ever found its direct ancestor anywhere in Siberia. Its parent branch does show up elsewhere: the Near East, the Caucasus, parts of Europe. X2a itself doesn't. So if it didn't take the same road as A through D, where did it come from? For years, that gap fed a genuinely wild idea. Some researchers argued that Ice Age Europeans, the Solutrean culture, out of what's now Spain and France, paddled across the Atlantic along the edge of the pack ice. The theory claimed this happened before the familiar Beringian migration story. The theory got real traction in the late 90s, partly because certain stone tools look similar. But it made one prediction you could actually test. If it were true, some of the oldest Native American skeletons should carry detectable European ancestry. In 2015, scientists sequenced the full genome of Kennewick Man, one of the oldest skeletons ever found in North America, roughly 9,000 years old. He was unambiguously Native American, and he carried one of the oldest known versions of X2a we've ever found. So, not some European line hiding inside a Native American skeleton, just Native American, all the way down. A separate review by researchers Jennifer Raff and Deborah Bolnick landed in the same place. There's no genetic reason to think X2a is any more likely to come from Europe than from Siberia. The Atlantic crossing idea doesn't hold up. So what's left? One serious idea. The founding population crossing into the Americas was never one uniform group. It already carried the ancestor of X2a, and that particular line just died out on the Asian side along the way. It's a coherent idea. It's also hard to prove. The ancestral sequence may simply never have been sampled, in Siberia or anywhere else. And here's the thing people miss. DNA, like this, isn't a pin dropped on a map. It shows big population patterns over thousands of years, not one village, and definitely not a number that sums up who a person is. In 2014, a team studying the genome of a 24,000-year-old boy from a Siberian site called Malta found something that fits this far better than any Atlantic crossing. Part of his ancestry traced back to a population also related to West Eurasians, a genetic ghost lineage scientists now call ancient North Eurasian. That same signal shows up, in smaller form, across many tested indigenous American populations, X2a carriers and non-carriers alike. So that Western-looking genetic echo in broader Native American ancestry, it wasn't planted by a boat crossing the Atlantic. It was already there, sitting inside the founding population of the Americas, long before the Sioux became associated with the Ohio Valley, the Upper Mississippi, or the Great Plains. And the Bering Sea itself was never really a one-way street. A 2023 study in the journal Current Biology looked at 3 people who died on a riverbank in Kamchatka, in far northeastern Siberia, around 500 years ago. Their DNA carried clear Native American ancestry. For thousands of years, people crossed that water in both directions, until the Ice Age ended, the sea rose, and the bridge went under, which brings the story back to the Sioux. Because the image most people carry of them isn't just genetically incomplete, it's historically incomplete too. Sioux oral tradition has always said the ancestors came from the east, from a great river, from forest country, not grassland. Linguists agree. Proto-Siouan, the ancestor language behind Lakota, Dakota, and their relatives, likely took shape in the Ohio River Valley and the Upper Mississippi region 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, a language rooted in eastern river valleys and farming communities. Sites in Minnesota place Dakota ancestors in the western Great Lakes region well over 1,000 years ago, not on horseback, but farming maize and building settlements along rivers. It wasn't until the early 1700s, after the Ojibwe got firearms through the fur trade and pushed west, that Sioux communities were driven out of Minnesota onto the open plains. There, they met the horse, brought north generations earlier by Spanish colonization, and, in under 100 years, rebuilt themselves into the mounted buffalo culture the world now associates with their name. The warriors who beat Custer at Little Bighorn had only been horse people for about 4 generations. Put all of it side by side. A founding population from Siberia that already carried an ancient echo of Western Eurasia, tens of thousands of years before any of this. A language rooted in eastern river valleys and farming communities. A displacement within living memory that turned river valley farmers into plains horsemen in a single century. And a hair sample sealed in glass for over 100 years that still matched the blood of a man standing in a lab in 2021. None of it cancels anything else out. It just piles up, layer on layer, into something too tangled for one clean origin story. The truth was never that the Sioux were someone else. The truth was that they were always more than the story history made small enough to remember.